Hello. Today I'm going to be painting this strange sky blue vintage suitcase. I've always wanted to paint it like an American flag. And I'm going to talk about problems with Marx and the need of the left to redefine itself as capital accumulation, and systems of production have drastically changed. One moment. For the ears, we have the leftover tapes from the Village Vanguard session Bill Evans had, which in my opinion is the best album of live jazz ever. But I'm pretty lame about that shit, so I don't want to talk too much about it. The real problem with anyone having to critique Marx, which people on the right run up to all the time, is that he doesn't really elaborate a system. There's no real Marxism, is the real issue, which is kind of ironic, because we really hear a lot more about Marxism than we do about Marx. And I don't really think, sorry, my cat's up to no good, it seems. I don't really think people have a real notion of what Marx was implying with his notion of whatever we want to call Marxism. That was a very poorly worded sentence. But what I mean is that there really is no Marxism. And Marx's idea was that once the worker was liberated, and new forms of being and new psychological capacities could fill the world, in a way that he didn't really mean to describe. And he doesn't try to put forth a system. So to even call him a communist or a socialist upon his own definitions of those words is kind of tricky even sometimes, because he saw it all as a historical movement and a logical necessity. He did not see it as an opinion. And that's why he, again, did not make opinions about a future he did not yet understand. But that also is the problem for, oh golly. Sorry about that. My cat needed a bit of attention, which I don't really mind. He's one of the only reasons I'm alive. But I kind of forgot what I was rambling about. I know it was about Marx. Suppose I'll start over. We don't really live in an era of factory workers. And I think when we're reading Marx now, he talks so much about the condition of the worker. And part of that is very alien to the modern reader, because there is a horrible alienation in the condition of the modern worker, in the office worker, that Marx had no notion of, but it's not the same as the plight of the factory worker in the Gilded Age, the train worker, the coal miner, before modern medicine. Entirely different thing. And that isn't to say there isn't a real alienation in the modern working environment, because if anything, I think it's more alienating. It has been strategically designed to isolate people from each other in ways that were in direct response to the geometric layouts of factories. I think that's a big reason why there's been such a stifling of anything we want to call a labor movement in America. I mean, like, really, I would relate it to the fall of the train industry, but that's just a corollary. But I mean, like, obviously the unions have been busted by like bureaucratic and administrative measures and problems of their own, but like the working environments we have are not really set up to allow for the kind of organization that unions were designed to provoke in like the era of mechanical production, when there would be tons of people experiencing the exact same material plight, arm in arm and shoulder to shoulder in horribly tiny cramped conditions next to each other for very long hours. Where now we have companies that strategically separate all of their operations into their corporation, like their actual body is not localized. It's something that is not adherent even to state anymore. You know, on the largest level, like the largest companies are not really American companies. And that's something also that Marx did not have in his time, really, like a corporate system of mechanical reproduction that is, one, more robotic than human, and two, not tied to a state, but instead ties the state to a system of other state subjugation. And again, I really only mean to bring this up because I don't think it's been elucidated enough. I think the politics are very much behind the technological change we've seen. Like, we shouldn't be considering communism or anything in any sort of social critique in terms of production, but instead it's like how they are manipulating our consumption. And that's telling that we already live in a state of so much surplus value that we really could adopt a simpler way of being and rearrange our state to have a communist state. I mean, like, we don't have to have a market anymore. We can produce everything we need extremely efficiently, distribute it robotically and algorithmically. We don't need people on the level we used to, even physical labor. A lot of it is merely just upheld to keep people busy, I'm quite convinced. But like on a lot of ways, like the material conditions that Marx dreamt about, really, and supposed have been realized. Like the necessity of capitalism as a historical movement has already fulfilled itself. And again, like, you read all these people, like, I'm always baffled when I go back through Adam Smith's writing, and it's probably a better critique of capitalism than Karl Marx is, to be honest. But Marx is not necessarily always anti-capitalist. And this is always like an interesting point to bring up to silly jabronis who watch like Ben Shapiro or whatever, who don't really read or engage with anything they disagree with, because they don't really understand that Marx saw capitalism as a historical necessity and not as like an evil in itself. Like, it's a kind of a human energy that had to exhaust itself painfully and disgustingly. And I don't mean that it's entirely necessitated everything that it did, like slavery especially. No capitalist supporter in the modern era seems to think about slavery. Slavery is capitalism taken to its logical extreme. And so now we just kind of live in a gray area of the logic of like the ancient notion of profit, which is kind of silly. But again, I don't really think that gets talked about much on the right. But it's hard to conceive of everything as a consumer society. And I mean, like, obviously, using those words makes me turn directly to Baudrillard, but he's confusing. And I mean, I've read his stuff multiple times, and I think he's one of the most valuable thinkers of the last 100 years, but also one of the most directly, intentionally confusing. But I would really advise anyone to read him, because he would elucidate some of the things I mean much better than I do. Because he directly saw the need for a new kind of leftism. Because, I mean, he was kind of the first philosopher to even address the television. But he saw the television as a historical movement towards the image dominating reality, which obviously has been completely realized. There's a reason I don't really want to show my face as much as show other images. And I don't really know what the new leftism needs to be. Obviously, it needs to be one that's primarily concerned with the death of the natural world before anything else. Because, that's not a political issue. And the fact that our politics is, literally idly waiting by while the oligarchs literally have bunkers waiting for the people to get angry enough to move in some fashion, literally about roads and trains. Like basic political movement, like nothing even radical. Like, other countries have trains that work perfectly fine. The power of the sun is far more vast and large than what we could extract from the dead dinosaur bones. It's honestly, the cowardice of our system is baffling. The fact that it is just curling up and allowing itself to let its power slip into bunkers while the rest of us know it's happening is fascinating and really telling of the power of advertising. But that's neither here nor there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Should we do 7 times 7, 49? Ohio is not a U.S. state. We give that one to whomever wants it. We're going to do 7 by 7. I said, fuck Ohio. There's no reason to even think about politics outside of the death of the natural world. And I don't really understand how everyone could get this as an implicit fact and still kind of ignore it in regular praxis. I don't like using the word praxis, pardon me. Practice, just in regular speech. Like, Twitter and so many of these things are directly and algorithmically designed to take conversations that could be about the oligarchs profiting off of their discordance and making them about us disagreeing with each other on things we already kind of don't disagree with each other on, but words make more confusing, and none of us are talking in person and can't look each other in the eyes. And I don't really think people have mentioned enough how important eye contact is. But a lot of the problems we see with alienation, especially with young men on the internet, which is a strange epidemic that I'm kind of fascinated by. I think a lot more of it has to do with eye contact even than sexual frustration. And I don't think that gets properly recognized. Because I think a lot of things get projected into the sexual realm, but I don't think they start there. I think the sexual realm is always kind of the most confusing and most revealing, but rarely the most actualized. Like, I've found usually when people have strange mix-ups or like strange things with their sex, they're playing with their mind in a way, playing a game with themselves that they are aware of, but also kind of bask in like a child. I'm really getting off topic. Goodness me. Trying to talk about Marx. It's hard to. We still talk about him. It's odd in itself. There's a lot more other thinkers that no one ever gets headspace for. I really think I have a bit more to say. Like Proudhon, I don't know. Perhaps some of this is just book suggestions. I think I need to take a break.